Alrighty, so the objective of this video is... Well, the objective of this video is kind of as like a follow-on to the the several videos that I made speculating about new units and new specializations and things like that. This video is going to basically be my thoughts about what units can be changed in the current game. Either buffed or reworked. This, and if I'm going to be entirely honest, this is not the first time I've tried making this video. I cannot guarantee that this video is not going to turn into a rant. So. But this is just the final time I'm going to make it, so. Anyway. The whole idea here is essentially... Well, here's the thing. I don't really like suggesting buffs for things. And the reason why I don't is because, for lack of a better term, I think that the idea of suggesting buffs has almost... that some people with an inflated ego will try and suggest buffs and automatically assume that their position is right and should not be questioned. Now, already I'm dangerously close into rant territory. But what I mean by that is just because it's the attitude. I've seen people suggest buffs or nerfs or reworks and things like that, and I agree with them. I've seen other people suggest them, and I don't. And I don't mean I don't agree with what they're suggesting. I disagree with the tone in which they suggest it. That is, for lack of a better term, what I mean. Anyway, so, and it's not just buffs. The problem is that there's only one thing that I could think of that you can actually nerf. That one thing off the top of my head that you should nerf. And that's this stupid thing. Because I think it is stupid. And more specifically, I don't think that this is stupid necessarily. Although I note that it doesn't come with any add-on armor. You have these like screens on the sides. Is that for flotation? Huh. But what I mean is the range of this thing. Because it's stupid, if I'm going to be entirely honest. A 1900 meter range. For what is effectively a gun system, you have a greater high altitude range than a missile. Like a Stinger. Or an Igla. So basically any kind of man-pads. In fact, okay, now I have to check. What's the low altitude range of a Stinger? You have a longer low altitude range than a Stinger. Your high altitude range is higher than any man-pads in the game. It's higher than that. It's higher than that. Higher than that. Higher than that. Anyway. In fact, hang on a second. Where is the... There's the Tunguska. I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's even higher than this. Even if you go with the Panzer, it's higher. The high altitude range is higher than a Panzer. Granted, that's without the radar on, but still. So, I think we can all agree that it's just a little bit nuts. And so maybe drop it down to... I mean, I get it. I get it. It's a gun system. But still, maybe drop it down to something like 1,500 meters. Or 1,600 meters. Because if you look at contemporaries... support. If you look at contemporaries, you've got... and, okay, you can count this. It's still a gun system, but that's only like a 1,200 meter range. Or with this, 1,300, or this, 1,400 at low altitude, but no high altitude. You've got things like this, which is 1,300 at both low and high. Things like this, which is 1,500 at both low and high, and you can argue that even that's a little bit high. You can argue that it should be 1,400, but I'm not really going to quibble that point. Actually, that's a point. Go to vehicle. This thing. What is that? That's 1,200. That's also 1,500, so again, you can make an argument that that shouldn't be that high. Although that more than doubles the vehicle cost. What else do we have? The LAV-AD at 1,300. Although, to be fair, we are talking about 30mm projectiles here. The PVADs, also 1,300. Centurion, 1,400, which is kind of interesting because they're both shooting the same gun. Which I find amusing. Oh, and the stats have been standardized. When did that happen? Because I remember that the PVADs and the Centurion... I can't remember exactly when, but I remember that they had different stats over here, and that's apparently been standardized since. And then you have things like this, which is 1,200 at low altitude. I note this does not have the ability to engage fixed-wing aircraft. And I believe the linebacker does not either. No. No, it does not. So, yeah. You can make an argument for dropping this thing, not that thing, this thing down to like 1,600, and then maybe dropping the 30mm down to like 1,400. But anyway, that's about the only thing I could think of that I would argue needs a nerf, necessarily. But, that's just me. And if you're gonna do that, I'd be fine if you dropped the price to like 110 or 120. And heck, if you wanted to give this thing an armor package similar to... Where is it? I think I need recon. Similar to something like this, where you can throw on some reactive armor and make it tougher, I'd be fine with that. Don't you have that option to do something like that with the BMP-3? Yeah, and that's also based off of the same chassis, if memory serves. Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, the wheel arrangement's exactly the same. So this is based off a BMP-3 chassis. So you could give it the same armor package as a BMP-3, and I'd be fine with that if you want to up the price to about 20 points. Or give it an armor package for 20 points if you want to bring the price back up to 130. I have seen people suggest giving this thing radar. Personally, I would disagree. But, and the idea behind the suggestion was basically to allow it to engage cruise missiles. And other people pointed out that systems like the Tor are perfectly capable of doing that. And besides, if you were to give this thing radar, it probably would be firmly OP then. As for the meat, for lack of a better term, of this video, I'm going to be opening this with a bit of a controversial statement, arguing that the Patriots need to be reworked. Now, here's the thing. And I say the Patriots, I specifically mean the PAC-3, and to a slightly lesser extent the PAC-3 MSE. The Patriots function using a hit-to-kill method. Contrary to the S series or the S300s, I believe the S350 as well, or the PAC-2, which all have an HE warhead in their missiles. The PAC-3 and the PAC-3 MSE are designed to physically slam into the target. Now, I'm going to quote here an air defender, or at least a former U.S. Army air defender, who actually taught how to use and employ the Patriot system when he was describing things like the PAC-3 and the PAC-3 MSE. And he described them as being, quote, a telephone pole traveling a Mach 4 unclassified, unquote. So what I suggest you do is you take the missile, you remove the blast radius entirely, and then you up the damage like 25. So either the missile misses, or it just schwacks whatever it hits. Short of large transport aircraft, that is. That's actually a point. Go to aircraft. Where is 30 health, 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 30 health. That's about 20. That's 25, interestingly enough. $30. And that's also 25. Okay, 25 is a bit of an odd number. Anyway, I digress. And the reason why I suggest this is because I'm pretty sure that doesn't change anything. Is because if you do that, well, like I said, you either get a situation where the missile misses entirely or it kills the target. You might want to drop the damage down to like 24 to make sure it'll kill pretty much any fighter-sized aircraft, but nothing greater than that. To keep it from killing the AN-72 or the Tu-22M. Which, I would honestly expect the very C-130 variants to have 25 health as well, but I guess not. Anyway. And I say this because it'd be more realistic. And I'll get to the PAC-3 MSE, because the PAC-3 MSE works slightly differently, but I'll get to that in a moment. I just have to make a word on realism. And this... I don't want to go on a rant. But I'm kind of skirting the edge when I'm saying this. Realism is nice and all, and I'm suggesting this change because it would make the Patriots more realistic, but this is still a game. So just because something is realistic does not mean it should be applied as gospel to the game. I mean, sure, okay, yes, the Patriots are capable of theoretically one-shotting anything that hit, and this would even go out to things like the Tu-160 or the IL-76, because if you hit any aircraft with a telephone pole traveling a Mach 4 unclassified, you're going to do an immense amount of damage to it. The problem is that it doesn't need to be realistic. Just because this is realistic does not mean the change needs to be implemented, is what I'm trying to get at. I'm suggesting it because it would be realistic, but that doesn't mean that it should be in the game. And you can further reinforce this point by basically by highlighting that. Oh, is that traversable? Huh. And you can further reinforce this point by another highlight. A number of U.S. anti-aircraft missile systems, I don't know exactly which, but I know that this involves both ground and air-launched missiles, do not just target a hostile aircraft. They target the cockpit specifically. And they do this because shooting down an aircraft is fine and all, but if the pilot just ejects, he can get back into another aircraft. But if you schwack the pilot, who may be well-trained and experienced, then that's a more significant loss, you can argue, than just losing the aircraft in question. is the idea of the pilot getting turned into soup by the before-mentioned telephone pole traveling in Mach 4 unclassified. And I say that just as hyperbole, because I don't know if the Patriot is one of these systems, although I suspect that it is. Sound a bit brutal? Well, yes. It's war. It's going to be brutal. Anyway, I digress. That's another thing that you can argue should be added to the game in real life, if for those who utterly attest that that because it's in real life it needs to be transferred in game as gospel. No, like if you're gonna do that, no, don't. And the pilot ejection mechanism is fine. Honestly, I think it. Like, I get it, the ability to refund the pilot as a bit of a dampener that the plane got lost. And if I'm going to be entirely honest, I kind of wish that ejections were more common. But still. And, oh, there's an MTVR over there. I just noticed that. Anyway, I digress. The Pack 3 MSC works slightly differently than the Pack 3. The Pack 3, whereas the Pack 3 just physically hits the target, the MSC does have kind of a warhead. And it's also worth noting, just as an aside, the MSC in the name stands for, if memory serves, Missile Segment Enhancement. Basically, it's like a Pack 3, but bigger and better. The reason why the MSC was developed was because there was a gap in the engagement coverage between Patriot Pack 3 and THAAD. And the idea was that if an opponent discovered this gap, they could exploit it so that they launched a weapon system through this gap where it was basically too high for Patriot to intercept, but still too low for THAAD to intercept. Also, as an aside, I have seen THAAD argued as a system to be added to the game as a SAM system. I mean, yes, you could technically do that, but it wouldn't make much sense. And I say that because that is not a SAM system. That is an anti-ballistic missile system. It was designed specifically to be an anti-ballistic missile system. THAAD is designed from the ground up to engage, and only engage, things that are at altitudes that are far higher than any conventional military aircraft can fly. I'm talking about things that are in the edge of space. In fact, they may as well be in space. So that's the kind of thing that THAAD is supposed to engage. Now, theoretically, if you hooked up a THAAD launcher to maybe something like a Patriot or Aegis radar, maybe through something like IBCS, and you also went and you completely ripped out all the software for the THAAD system and then replaced it with entirely new software, you could theoretically take a THAAD interceptor and use it against a fixed-wing aircraft at low altitude. But I'm not convinced. Not to mention, you may also have to rip out a bunch of hardware, too. Anyway, I digress. The Pack 3 MSE. Basically, the way this works is the Pack 3 MSE does technically have a warhead, but it's a bit of an unconventional one. Instead of having a standard HE warhead that detonates and tries to destroy the target and in the process destroys the missile, what you basically have is around the missile, you have a ring of explosives, like a relatively small amount of explosives, and then a bunch of, for lack of a better term, steel ball bearings. It's kind of like it's kind of like the outside of the missile, close to the nose, if I'm not mistaken, is basically been wrapped with claymore mines, with the point side towards enemy side of the mine facing outward. And what this does is right before the missile impacts the target, this explosive detonates. And so instead of having the before-mentioned telephone pole traveling at Mach 4 unclassified, what you basically have is you have an expanding cone of ball bearings with the before-mentioned telephone pole right in the middle of it. And it's kind of like a shotgun blast with something like birdshot, but with a metal, a large metal flechette in the middle, if you want to translate it into shotgun shell terms. But that's kind of what it's like. And so what you might do here is up the damage to, say, 25, or heck, maybe even 30. Probably just 25, though. And then give it a small blast radius of, like, 20 meters or 10 meters. Or if you do give it a blast radius, alter the way that the damage calculation at distance is done, or the damage fall-off calculation, so that the damage falls off rapidly. And the idea behind this warhead is so that even if the missile itself just misses the target, because given the guidance system on these things, they're going to be they're going to make it very, very close to the target. But even if the missile just misses, the missile itself, the telephone pole traveling Mach 4 unclassified itself misses, you're going to shower the target with these ball bearings, and you're still going to bring it down. So that's the idea. So a relatively small blast radius of like 10 meters. I mean, alternatively, I suppose you can argue that you have a small blast radius of like 10 meters, but you alter the damage fall off so that the damage either falls off very slowly with a 10 meter blast radius, so that if the target is like 8 meters away, it still takes pretty much full damage, or up the blast radius to like 20 meters, but alter the damage fall off so that the damage falls off very quickly. So if the target is 10 or 12 meters away, it only takes a relatively small amount of damage. I suppose you could do it either way like that. Would that make the Patriots OP? Honestly, I don't know. And that's also another issue I have with some people suggesting that the developers should do XYZ. Yes, you play the game, but you don't make the game. I trust the developers to know what they're doing. And this is something that a lot of people apparently don't. Anyway. Actually, it occurs to me that I don't really have any idea for a nerf for a US system. And that's because I genuinely can't think of any. At least I can't think of any that would matter. The only thing I could think of that would nerf the US would be to take... Or no, it's not this. It's this. Would be to take and to remove the laser guidance off the prism. Or off these rockets in general. Like, take this... Actually, where's HIMARS? HIMARS is a better example. Remove the laser guidance off that. That's not laser guided. And remove the laser guidance off that. And the reason why I say that is simply because these aren't laser guided weapons. They aren't laser guided. They're GPS guided. It's GPS and INS. Even Prism isn't laser guided. Although to be fair, I think where's Iskander? Touchka. Okay, well Touchka's not laser guided. Where is Iskander? There's Iskander. And these are also apparently laser guided for some reason. The cruise missiles, however, are not. Anyway, the point basically being that you could remove the laser guidance because it doesn't make much sense. So, but I digress. So you have that thing with the Patriots. Next, and let me just pull up my notes here. Yes. Next has to do with this thing. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the linebacker can still carry troops, even though it was intended as an anti-aircraft platform. Okay. Small change that I would recommend would be to basically allow it to carry troops. What on earth is that? Is that supposed to be a radar? I don't know. But basically allow it to carry troops. And the idea here is, well, it's pretty straightforward. what you're doing is you're effectively turning it into something akin to... Where is it? You're effectively turning it into something like this. Or something like this. Troop transport vehicle with a dedicated anti-aircraft gun on top. Does Russia have any other examples of something like that? I don't think so. And basically the idea is that by turning it into, again, a troop transport vehicle, this is where your manpads teams would go. Because if I were to, say, make a VDV mech deck real quick, and I go to the infantry, you have the option of piling in these guys into this, or any of the other transports. Where's the VDV Eaglet team? Same thing here. Instead of piling them into a BTRD, you can pile them into the BTRZD. Now, the real question that I have that I think would be interesting is whether or not you would be able to, because the idea is to have a deck where you have the mech AA Stingers, and they could pile into the linebacker. And so the question here would the linebacker replace anything? Would it replace either the two Bradleys? So it's either just like the M113, the AMPV, or the linebacker. Or would it be added onto it, like with this MTLB ZU-23 variant you have in mech? Now, I'd argue for the latter because that has more options, but it's still something that could be considered. This would make the most sense if you also, like I suggested in the first video, if you gave Armor Brigade the an M-SHORAD based on the AMPV chassis, which is basically just like an AMPV chassis, but with the Striker M-SHORAD's turret and the radar. Now, as for the upgrades for something like this, I suppose you would still have the engine, and you'd probably still have the armor. But one thing that I think would be very interesting is whether or not you would still have either of these upgrades. And I honestly don't know. One potential issue that I can see with the idea here is that you do not have an APS. Now, some people may not necessarily call that an issue, and some people think that APS is far too common. I am not one of them. But you don't have any APS. The problem is that if you go to a Bradley and you look at the APS, unlike an A3 Bradley, the APS is on the turret, which is also where the radar modules for the linebacker are, on the turret. So you don't really have room for an APS. The alternative would be to try and put the radar modules around the hull, which I suppose is something you can do, and is something I'd like to point out that they've done with the Striker, which is interesting because when you think about it, that must require a bit of extra programming, because the turret can traverse independently of the hull. Theoretically, and I'm not a programmer, so I may be spouting pure malarkey here. If the radar picks up something, the radar then basically has to tell the turret, hey, point over here at that. And you need software that basically understands that the radar and the weapon system are on separate platforms, so that when something is picked up, you then have to put the programming in to actually align the platform with the weapon system with the target. Whereas theoretically, with the radar on the same platform as the weapon systems, like with the M6 M-SHORAD, you don't have something that is as complicated. But anyway, I digress. You could try and get around that by basically putting the radars on the hull, but I'm not entirely sure how. And then add the APS to the turret. Alternatively, you could just go without an APS, which wouldn't necessarily be remiss. I mean, the regular M-SHORAD doesn't have an APS itself, so... The next thing I wanted to talk about was something that has bugged me significantly for quite a while. And it has to do with the... it has to do with both of these specializations. Specifically, and if anyone has watched these, they're probably going to recognize this rant. The fact that we cannot airdrop a Humvee with the armor package. The little parachute disappears. This is annoying. Very, very annoying. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the way the US and the way... oh, it makes the mirrors wider. If you look at the way the US and the way Russia seem to operate, Russia has more things that can swim, whereas the US has more things that can be airdropped. So, to try and emphasize the difference here, because pretty much every Russian specialization has something that can swim. Okay? Like, honestly, if you look at all of them, if you just look at all of them, they all have things that can swim, at least without an armor package. Okay, that can't swim. That's a Mazda. But this can swim. Is that... I'm pretty sure that can swim as well, yes. That can swim. But still, they have things that can swim. Obviously, that can swim, that can swim, that can swim. That can swim, that can't swim. Can that swim? No, that can't swim. That can swim, that can swim. That can swim or be airdropped. That can swim. 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 Okay, no, that can't swim. Still, my point is there's a lot of things that can swim, and there's actually a surprisingly large number of things that can also be airdropped, at least if you don't have an armor package. And to be fair, if you do add an armor package, it removes the ability both to swim and be airdropped. But to emphasize that things can be airdropped, to emphasize for the US that things can be airdropped, why can't we airdrop these things with the armor package? And this gets particularly annoying with some systems, like the, where is it? Like the Hawkeye, for example, because this also comes with smoke on the armor package. So if I want to put smoke on it, then I can't airdrop it. It's probably not going to come out before this video does, but I did a playthrough of Baltisk using the absolutely airdroppable deck. It was pain. And there was one moment where a BRDM-3 snuck past my lines to my artillery and then basically ate pretty much everything. And because the deck is built around the idea that absolutely everything should be airdroppable, I didn't have the armor package and by extension the smoke on the Hawkeye. So I couldn't just tell them to pop smoke and then run away. Or at least run away long enough for me to get the Guardians over there. The Avenger has the same problem. Beacon armor or smoke. And now some systems don't, which is kind of baffling because you can mount smoke pods on these. You can mount smoke pods on these. This thing, you can mount smoke pods on it, but you can't mount smoke pods on either of these two for reasons. And also, you can't mount smoke on this. And then another thing I would like to be able to airdrop is pretty much anything based off the MTV or the LMTV chassis with the up armor package. Because here's the thing. Look at the weight. 11,000 metric tons. A Brutus. 12,000 metric tons. And that can be airdropped. The LMTV. 10,000 metric tons. That can be airdropped, but not with the armor package. Slam Ram is 12,500 metric tons. That can't be airdropped. You want to know what else is 12.5 metric tons and can be airdropped? This thing. And 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 they can all be airdropped with the extra armor package. I would argue that the airdrop specialization, that in airdrop specialization, you could make a legitimate argument that the specialization best suited for airdropping in the US is actually the Marine Corps. Because you can airdrop these vehicles with these armor packages. So, because every single thing that can take an armor package can be airdropped. It can all still be airdropped. So, why can't we airdrop things like the MTV with the armor package, which is lighter? I mean, heck, we're able to airdrop no, that's not 19. Where's MGS? There's MGS. A 19,000 or a 19 metric ton Striker. Why can't we airdrop a 11 metric ton MTV? Or a 4 metric ton Humvee? Now, one idea that I suggested, which could be used here to sort of get around the issues, would be to actually make the armor package add weight to the vehicle. So if you have a armor package on a Humvee, it goes from maybe 4 metric tons to like 5 or 5.5 metric tons. So you are still paying. Paying for the ability to airdrop these vehicles. And honestly, I would accept the B-Kit armor package being like 10 points for the ability to airdrop the vehicle with the armor package. Or things like here, the armor package, increase that to like 10 points. Or things like here, the armor package, increase that to maybe 15 points. Along with adding weight to the vehicle. And then there's also things like HIMARS. Now, to be entirely honest, systems like the HIMARS, the MML, things like that, I don't know if you can airdrop those. To my knowledge, you can't. I mean, you might be able to airdrop HIMARS, but I'm pretty sure you can't airdrop anything else. You can't airdrop Slam Ram, at least not, or you can't airdrop it in the game. This, to my knowledge, doesn't actually exist in real life. What they've done is they've taken a flatbed MTV chassis, and then they have put the missile launcher off of what was originally supposed to be on a Humvee in the back of it. They were basically supposed to take something like this, and then the launcher was going to be on this. Which kind of makes me think they should take this, put a NASAM-style box launcher on the back, kind of like the vehicle you get in the Baltic Battalion Specialization, make it a HIMAD air defense system, and then just take a flatbed Humvee like this, put this launcher on the back of it as your Tor and or OSA-style SHORAD system. Yes, the fact that they changed the Slam Ram from a HIMAD system to a SHORAD system is going to bug me. So, just allow us to airdrop those things. And I'm not saying you should allow us to airdrop the HIMARS or the Stinger. but allow us to airdrop vehicles with the armor package on them. Ideally, that would include the MTV, the Slam Ram, the HIMARS, and the MML, but it's not exactly necessary. I just want the ability to airdrop Humvees with armor packages. The next thing I wanted to cover was the troopers for Striker Cav. And if I'm going to be entirely honest, where's the infantry? There's the infantry. I am a little bit disappointed. Well, I say disappointed. Maybe disappointed is not the right word, but you only get 2 missiles with these guys, and it seems kind of pointless. So what I would prefer is maybe take their price, lower it to 80, remove the Javelin entirely, give them 2 or 3 more AT4s, and then give us an option of upgrading the unit cost. How much is Marines? Marines are what, 95? Yeah, they're 95. Upgrade the unit cost for like an extra 10 or maybe 15 points to remove all the AT4s altogether in place of a Javelin with maybe 4 or 6 missiles instead of the way they are now. Now, I understand that you might still be able to get use out of the AT4s. Okay, cool. But they're very short-ranged, and their pen isn't great. And in reality, the AT4s are only really intended for use against lightly armored vehicles like IFEs, not tanks. So I would love the option here to at least double that number of Javelins. How many Javelins does the weapon team have? 6 across 2 Javelins. Okay. Actually, that's a point. Where is the cat Javelin? How many missiles do you have? 4. Okay, so yeah, just like 4 here. Or you only have 3 missiles here, don't you? Yeah, you have 3, but then again, you have 3 guys. So that makes a degree of sense. Oh, that's interesting. And then, where is SOCOM? Where's the Ranger Javelin team? You get like, what, 4 missiles here? Yeah, you get 4. So I suppose you could do something similar to this, where you give troopers 4 missiles. I mean, that's what I would do. And these guys too, if I'm going to be honest, either give them another Stinger or maybe give them a couple more missiles. But that's just me. That's what I would do. Is that a direct buff? Yes. Next is going to involve stealth. Stealthy aircraft. So I need... yes, I need planes. Here's the thing about stealth. That's what I'm looking for. If I'm going to be entirely honest, I think the way the game's AI handles air-to-air combat kind of shafts stealth aircraft in general, and the F-22 in particular. Because the whole point of stealth is not to avoid being spotted. The whole point of stealth is to avoid being spotted first. The problem, though, is if you tell a stealthy aircraft like an F-22 to go kill an enemy aircraft, the thing the AI does is immediately guns it to get as close as it can to that enemy aircraft and basically starts dogfighting with it. Okay. That's not necessarily a bad idea when it comes to things like an F-15, F-16, or F-A-18. But if you're talking about a platform like an F-22, you're giving up one of your greatest advantages in your stealth. And yes, I know the F-22 has very long-range missiles. Okay, cool, that's fine. But still. And it's worth noting that the only way you can actually take advantage of it, because here's the thing. The F-22 is the only aircraft in game that can actually fire missiles from stealth. And the only way you can do that is if it's fitted with the AIM-260. Let me pull up a calculator and demonstrate something real quick. Now, the view range of pretty much every fighter aircraft in the game is about 12,000 meters. Excuse me, hiccup. Well, it's not about, it is 12,000 meters. With a stealth value of 1.75, which is basically a divisor, divided by 1.75 means that if an F-22 is flying towards a target, which, for the sake of it, let's assume the target's not moving, and the target aircraft is just magically hovering in the air, it's going to be spotted at a distance of 6,857 meters, or well, 6,857 meters distance. Now, you might be looking at the AMRAAM thinking, well, that has a range of 7,000 meters, so the F-22 can fire that from stealth. You're talking about less than a 143 meter difference. Assuming that the target is just hovering there and not moving, the F-22's own forward movement is going to close that small 143, or I think I said 143 meter difference incredibly fast, probably before the missile even has enough time to aim. For all intents and purposes, you do not have the ability to fire AMRAAMs from stealth. But if you have the and this also goes for the F-35. However, if you lower the stealth value down to, like, say 2 for the F-22, the F-35, and maybe other aircraft, and maybe like 1.5 for the H-57, and I'll come back to that one, then what you've effectively done is you have halved your detection range. So it's now a flat 6,000 meters, which means you have a 1 kilometer grace period between aiming an AMRAAM, or the AMRAAM starts aiming, because it doesn't fire when it gets within range, it starts aiming when it gets within range. And you can make an argument to add a sort of grace period that's maybe, I don't know, 10% of weapons range, so that if an enemy unit gets within this 10% buffer, but is not actually within weapons range, the friendly unit will aim at it prematurely. So, like, say you have a tank with a 1,400 meter gun range. Add a 10% buffer. So when a unit gets within 1,540 meters of the tank starts aiming at it. It does not engage the unit until it gets within 1,400 meters, but you start aiming at it within this buffer. That should speed combat up a bit, I think. Which, granted, may not be something that the developers want. But this would allow the aircraft to actually maybe fire a missile or two before being spotted. And if I'm going to be entirely honest, I don't think it would actually change the F-22 all that much either. Because if you look at the AIM-260, you're not really, if you buff the stealth to a rating of 2, you're not really getting anything out of it. Because, yeah, sure, it's only like, what is it, an 857 meter difference? I'm pretty sure it's like 857 and change. But you're not getting anything out of it. What you're just getting is, or you're not getting anything much out of it. Yeah, again, at the speed at which these aircraft fly, particularly if the F-22 and its target are closing towards each other, that's not going to make any difference. That extra 857 meters is not going to make any difference. The missile's still going to be in the air. It might give you a small grace period, but that's about it. Now, assuming anyone watches this video, and assuming they're of the idiot persuasion, and by that I mean the English-speaking pro-Russian crowd, they're probably going to be listening to what I say here about stealth and thinking, oh, that's just more buffs to the Americans, blah, 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 blah. Russia is superior, blah, 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 blah. And my counter-argument to this is that everything I just said about a stealth buff, because you'll note I did address the SU-57, say buffing the stealth from that to about 1.5. If this stealth buff change, if there's any aircraft that I think would actually benefit from it the most, it would be the Su-57. And I'm going to use math to explain why. Here's the deal. The Su-57 has a vision range of 12,000 meters, like pretty much all fighters, but its stealth is only 1.25. The longest range weapon system the Su-57 has access to is the R-37, with a range of 9,000 meters, much like the AIM-260 or the AIM-174. Now, if we were to take 12,000 meters and divide that only by 1.25, you get 9,600 meters. This means that while an Su-57 is going to be able to spot another aircraft like an F-15, F-16, or F-A-18 before the Su-57 itself is spotted, the Su-57 is going to be seen before it's able to get within weapons range. At all. Like, there is no way an Su-57 is going to be able to stealth fire any of its weaponry against another fighter-sized aircraft. And I say fighter-sized aircraft. Against a fighter aircraft. This, I mean, sure, if you have things like... What's the vision range on an Su-34? 6,000 meters. But that's no different than an Su-25 or an Su-24 or an A-10 or a night attack Harrier. I mean, heck, even the FA-18D can see out to 12,000 meters. But you're not going to be able to stealth fire an R-37 against a target that you couldn't already stealth fire a R-77 from an Su-35 at, is the point I'm trying to get at. But if we were to instead calculate that using a 1.5 stealth value, which basically cuts a third off of the vision of anything trying to see it, it goes down to 8,000 meters. Which then gives you the same the same thing I was getting at about the AMRAAM. You have a 1 kilometer grace period. So, because here's the thing, okay, if the Su-57 with a 9,000, effectively being spotted at 9,600 meters away, is flying at the before mentioned magical stationary target, and let's assume this stationary target is armed with 7,000 meter range missiles. The Su-57 is spotted at 9,600 meters. At 9,000 meters, it starts aiming up its R-37s. It fires an R-37. It's soon going to be 8,000 meters away. By the time that R-37 has reached the target, the Su-57 has probably gotten within range that the target is now going to start slinging, say, AMRAAMs or R-77s back at the Su-57. So... But if the stealth goes down to 8,000 meters... Now, to be fair, if the stealth goes down to 8,000 meters, this doesn't really change any aspect of the engagement. But it would allow the Su-57 to ripple off R-37s from stealth. It would also, again, the before-mentioned changes, something I didn't cover, is it would make the idea of an F-35A equipping it as a fighter to be more attractive. Because you have that before mentioned 1 kilometer grace period. So because you have that before mentioned 1 kilometer grace period. So seeing F-35s with an air-to-air loadout might be more common. But I say this simply because the idea of having... Hang on, that's 265. That's 290, so why is that a whole bunch cheaper? I mean, you don't get a gun. Your speed of maneuverability is the same. Flares and ECM are the same. Why is that? Huh. Anyway, I digress. The point is that stealth buff would help stealth aircraft actually leverage their stealth, is what I'm trying to get at. And then getting distracted with a variety of things. Because here's the thing, okay? If I'm going to be entirely honest, I will rag on the SU-57 mercilessly. I will be the first one to do it. But if I'm going to be entirely honest, I kind of like the way the aircraft looks. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I kind of like it. And for some reason, the engines are angled slightly farther apart. I don't think the aircraft is capable of anything nearly as good as the Russians claim it is. But I like it. I think it's an interesting aircraft. Even if, again, I don't think it's as good as the Russians claim it is, and I think that the aircraft was developed on a flawed design philosophy that favors maneuverability, although that can apply to most Russian aircraft in general. So the next thing I wanted to mention, and this is going to start my swing towards Russia, okay? Because I do have, there are some Russian things that I do think could use a buff. Excuse me, hiccups. And next are these guys, guard motor rifles. Now, I've seen some people suggest buffing them, and one thing I've seen people suggest is basically giving them, hang on, 400? No, that's same as the AT4. Giving them the RPG-30, this thing that ignores APS. I don't think so. Well, one thing I think you should do is up their armor to 8, and or up their availability to something like 6. Because both the US and Russia have units that have 8 armor. In fact, a number of the VDV units all have 8 armor, which is kind of interesting. Except the VDV Spetsnaz, which are apparently kitted out for room clearing. But even then, if you kit them out for range, you're looking at a... Oh, wow, that was not bad for a DMR. Huh. You're looking at something still with 8 armor. Even the basic snipers have 8 armor. They have 10, regardless of loadout. SSO has 10, also in their long range, which I note. And then everything else has 6. I thought there was another unit that had, well, though, these guys have 10. They have 10 either way. I thought there was another Russian unit that had 8. They have 10... 6. Ah, here we go. 8. Russian naval infantry have 8. But the US also has a number of infantry squads that have 8. Like the Marines have 8. Well, these guys have 10. It goes down to 8 when you select the standoff. That's 8. Does that go up to 10? Yeah. You know, honestly, I kind of wish it stayed at 10. Because the SSO stays at 10. The Spetsnaz, the very Spetsnaz ones stay at 10. So I kind of wish it stayed at 10 when you went into long range. That's at 8. Although it does appear to change somewhat depending on the loadout. But you have that. You also have Airborne, which is set at 8. And then I believe Rangers is also set at 8. Or 10 if you want the CQC variant. What are these guys set at? 10? And again, it goes to 8. Anyway. However, if you took these guys and you up them to 8, that would help differentiate them from something like these guys. Or these guys. How much armor do these guys have? 10. And they stay at 10, even if you take the RPG-7. So, you could buff that, is basically the point I'm trying to get at. I wouldn't give them the RPG-30, as I said, and if you do increase their availability, yes, I forget how to English at times, I'm not sure increasing their armor and their availability at the same time would be a good move, maybe one or the other. While we're talking about Russian infantry, the next thing I wanted to argue to buff is this unit right here. Specifically the number of missiles that this thing gets. It only gets 3. Now, the Verba team, which is smaller, gets 6. And then you have these guys, which is also smaller, and they have 2 launchers, they get 6. So, but again, 2 launchers. Now that is technically 3 missiles per launcher, but 2 launchers. Even... Don't these guys have a man-pets team? Yes, they do. It's right here. Even these guys, 6 missiles. Although, again, larger squad. So, you can take these guys. You could either give them a second launcher and 6 missiles, or at least give them 1 more missile. And even if you go to the US for comparison, Mech Rifle AA, small infantry squad, 4 missiles. Stinger teams, arguably the best man-pad unit in the game, 6 missiles. Troopers AA, 6 missiles. Ranger Jav, or, well, with the Stingers, 4 missiles. For that matter, where is the STT teams? STT teams also have 4 missiles. So, if you give these guys at least 4, I think that would help. I wouldn't actually give them a second launcher, because that leaves the US and Russia only as both nations that only have 1 launcher, or as both nations that only have 1 man-pads infantry unit that has 2 launchers, is what I'm trying to get at. Although, if you gave troopers a second man-pads, a second Stinger launcher, then you could give these guys a second Stinger launcher too, I suppose. And then the last thing I wanted to cover was the R-37/AIM-174, and I probably should have covered this when I was talking about aircraft. The thing is, when you look at things like the R-37 and the AIM-174 compared to the likes of the AIM-260, this is what I need. The AIM-174 is literally a Standard Missile 6 that has been... that has had the Mark 72 rocket booster knocked off the back, and that has been bolted to the hardpoint of an FA-18. Things like the R-37 Things like the R-37, on the other hand, is that, you don't get any R-37 options here? Huh. Is a purpose-designed very long-range missile. And wow, you have a lot of missile options. What's that, for 405 points? That's not too bad, all things considered. Although for 445 points, you can cut it out like that. Which might be better. Anyway, I digress. Now, the range of the AMRAAM is, at least in its AMRAAM D version, is about 160 kilometers, or 100 miles. And the range for the R77 is roughly the same. The range of the AIM-260 is expected to be about 200 plus kilometers, to at least match with something like the PL-15 that China has. Although I suspect the PL-15 is going to be treated kind of like an AMRAAM in-game. Maybe, instead of having a 7,000 kilometer range, you might quibble and argue that it should have a 7,500 kilometer range. But I suspect it's going to be treated as like the Chinese AMRAAM equivalent. However, the range of the AIM-260 might go out to like 300 kilometers, or about 180 miles. Yeah. However, the AIM-260, or not AIM-260, the AIM-174, like I said, is basically a Standard Missile 6 with the rocket booster knocked off the back. The official range for the Standard Missile 6 is 130 plus miles, which is about, like, what, 240 kilometers, give or take? Not sure. And then you can make an argument that, however, you can make an argument that an AIM-174 launched from a high-flying, high-speed aircraft could have a range potentially up to 400 kilometers, which is also roughly the same figures that, granted, they're released by Russia, and you know how much I just love trusting those guys. You can... what's the word I'm looking for? The range for the R-37 is roughly the same, is the point I'm trying to get at. You can make an argument that the range here is roughly the same as well. However, good grief, I have forgotten how to talk. The point I'm trying to get at is that if the R-37 and the AIM-174 have a longer range than the AIM-260, which I believe they do, maybe consider buffing the range of both of them to about 10,000 meters. That's what I'm trying to say, and failing miserably. Good grief. So you could consider buffing both of those up to about, again, 10,000 meters. And I think this would help. Again, you can argue it would help the Su-57, so you might see a price increase there. And I would accept a price increase in general, even on the FA-18C. Even though, if I'm going to be entirely honest, I think the FA-18C might be a little bit expensive for what you can carry, all things considered. Because if I wanted an FA-18C with 4 AMRAAMs and 5 minutes of loiter time, I get 325 points for 6 AMRAAMs and 2 Sidewinders. Can you carry? Oh, you can carry Sidewinders. Okay. Meanwhile, if I go over to the F-15C, the exact same loadout gets me 300 points. And the F-15C is faster and more maneuverable. Is that right? Yeah. It's faster and more maneuverable. Although the FA-18C has slightly better ECM. So I would honestly trim like 20 points off the cost of this thing. Anyway, I digress. So, for the AIM-174 and the R-37, like I said, maybe a 10,000 meter range buff. There was another thing I was going to suggest about... oh, yes. Another thing that you can consider, particularly fighter aircraft, is give them the ability to give them the ability to engage cruise missiles, or at least some of them. Maybe some of the more advanced ones, the Su-57, the Su-35, the MiG-29. What is it? Like the MiG-29K, I think. This thing, the MiG-39, and then the MiG-29 SMT. I think this is an older version of the MiG-29, if memory serves. Although it does have 4 hardpoints. I'm not sure which one is older. But give aircraft like that potentially the ability to intercept cruise missiles. And what you are doing, effectively, is you are... Can this thing carry, Yeah, it can carry R-37s. Huh. So... why not give them R-37s? Anyway. And then other U.S. aircraft that could do this would be like the F-35, the F-15EX, the F-16V, the F-22, and the F-18C and D. And by doing this, you're helping to deal with the cruise missile spam, for one. And it's something that some of these aircraft at least can actually do in real life. I'd like to point out that the Israelis using an F-35 actually demonstrated this in late 2023 when they shot down a Houthi cruise missile that was fired at Israel. Hang on, so which aircraft has... Oh no, that has the fuel tank option. I thought one of these, Oh, it's this one. Okay. Anyway, you have the ability to basically do something like that. And to give them the ability to shoot down cruise missiles is what I mean. Alright. Well, I didn't rant too badly in this one, which I guess is an achievement. Honestly, I say rant. The thing is, when it comes to things like... when it comes to games like this... Well, no. I probably shouldn't get into it. I'll just end the video here.